Carolyn Dube here. What's the play for today? Well, today I'm playing with the new Powerwax. Now, this stuff is slightly different from the old Powerwax, and I'll share with you what I noticed about the differences here in this video. Now, I'm going to be making collage papers, and then I'm going to be using them in some collages. But the reason why I really love using the Powerwax to do this is because of how customizable it is, how many things I can do with it that I can't do with paint alone. So, got a lot in here for you, so let's jump on in and get started. I'm going to start by putting some of the Powerwax onto my palette. Now, I happen to be using a gel plate here because I love using those as palettes, but you can use any surface that you like to use for a palette for this. The amount that I'm putting on there is not precise at all. In fact, this process is so forgiving, I don't have to worry about things being an exact ratio or anything like that. You just put some Powerwax on there and then some paint and mix them together. The previous formulation for Powerwax, what I'll call the old Powerwax, that stuff was juicier, it was wetter than this new stuff. But when I mix it together with the palette knife here, it's just as creamy, just as wonderful as the old version of Powerwax. I mentioned earlier that this is a very forgiving process. You don't have to have master mixing skills, because I clearly don't have those. Probably if I was more efficient at this, I could have done it in half the time. But I kind of liked how it felt, just sort of mushing those things together. So I may have mixed longer than what I had to, simply because I was enjoying the process. Oh, and by the way, at any time, if you feel like you want more color in it, you can add more paint to it. Or if you feel like you want a little less, you can add more wax to it. Now in comes the very fancy tool that I'm going to use to apply this, and that is the old hotel keycard. So what I'm doing now, well, this is all gratuitous, just playing around in it because I like how it feels. I like making little piles of it, but I promise I'm going to stop in just a moment and we can get to actually making the collage paper. I'm going to bring in a stencil to do that. This happens to be my Squares Layer Me stencil from StencilGirl Products. And then I'm going to put a piece of tissue paper on top of the stencil. And that's how the stencil stays completely clean in this, so there's no stencil cleanup involved at all. I'm putting a piece of repositionable tape there, just blue painter's tape. You could use washi tape, really anything that you like, to hold that tissue paper in place while I drag the Powerwax and paint mixture on top of this. I like things that are very forgiving, and this one definitely is, because the number of times that I'm going over it, I can put more on, take some off. It's very, very workable. You've got a lot of time to do this to get it just the way that you want. Now I'm working here on tissue paper, which can be a fairly fragile surface to work on, but yet it can take all of this, partially because this is a wax, which means it's not as juicy, it's not as wet as paint. So if I was just using straight paint to do this, my tissue paper would be much more wrinkly, the way tissue paper responds when you get it wet. But there is something that Powerwax can do that I cannot do with paint alone, and I'll show you that a little bit later in the video. When I'm creating, I like things that allow some flexibility, meaning it doesn't have to be exact. But there is one drawback to working that way, and that is I never know exactly how much I'm going to need. So when I mixed up the Powerwax here, I was very generous. That was a nice, healthy amount of Powerwax that I put on there. So I've got a lot of this to use, especially since I'm just squeegeeing on thin layers on here. It really doesn't take much Powerwax to do this. So that means I can do a whole bunch of these papers. So you're seeing 2 of them here, but just know I did about 4 more of them and still had a little bit of Powerwax left. So what do I do with those remnants, those leftovers, those little bits? Well, let me show you, because there's something else that Powerwax can do that's really neat. So I grabbed a piece of colorful cardboard from my stash, and I'm just going to play around using up the leftover here of that red Powerwax. Now, if I put it on in a thick way like this, it really stands out, and it's got this great dimensionality to it. Now, this is where I'm experimenting. I'm playing around, seeing how it behaves, so I'm going to try wiping some of it up. Now, because I'm generally a heavy-handed person when it comes to color and paint, I love that Powerwax allows me to get some really thin, very, very translucent bits added to things, and if I put too much on, I can change my mind and pull some of it off. So that really allows me to audition where colors are going to go and very easily pull them up, where if this had just been straight paint, it would have been hard to get that much of the red up. And since red is such a wonderfully vibrant, strong, powerful color, just a little bit of it can have a big impact. So that's why I like having that really thin layer there. So it's just a little bit of the red, but it's not quite as overpowering as those big swashes of it that I put on there to start with. Now up at the very top of the cardboard, notice how some of the power wax sat in that crease in the cardboard? Well, I really like how just having a little hint of the red being caught or snagged on some of the texture looks. So I'm going to put just a little bit more in there. Notice I'm not doing it very precisely. I'm just filling in that crack. Then I can come in with a paper towel and wipe up the excess, but leave the crack filled in. Art supplies that have multiple uses and are forgiving are ones that I will come back to again and again and play with. Now there is something that I noticed about the new Power Wax when I opened the lid, and that is it has a bit of a smell to it. But as soon as I got the lid on and as I'm mixing it in with paint, I didn't notice the smell. So it's really for me just whenever I'm right at that can and I'm getting it out, it has a bit of an odor, but once I've got it on the palette here and I'm mixing with paint, I don't notice an odor. And I also have not noticed any kind of odor on it once it's dry either. Now, you've seen me mix this stuff up already in the video, so I'm not going to make you watch all of my play here because I really do find it such a relaxing process to mix these things together. So we're going to jump ahead and get right to making the collage paper. Now, one of the things that I stumbled into when I was playing around with this stencil, my Speckles and Spots stencil from over at StencilGirl Products, is how it changes when I use a smaller amount of the Power Wax. Now, this is a normal one, so I'm just putting a nice normal amount on here to fully get the pattern, fully cover it. That's one look, but it really shifts and changes when I use a lot less of the Power Wax. And that is some of the tissue paper stays white. And so as I'm putting this on, because I'm running low, I'm near the end of using up the black here, I don't fully cover all of the shapes. And I love that little bit of white that's left in there. Now I had just a little bit of the Power Wax left after doing this one. And I thought, well, let's see what happens when I use up those last little remnants. I mean, there's not much on there. And having a very, very small amount on that hotel key card, I love the look. I love how much white space that leaves around those circles. Now that I've made a few collage papers, let me show you some of the ways that I play with them. I wanted to make little circles with the small squares inside of them, but I wanted them to be torn, not cut with scissors. I like that organic torn edge. But I also know that I don't want to think that hard when it comes to tearing a circle when I'm working in something this small. And that's what that paintbrush and water is for. I'm simply drawing the shape on the back that I want to tear. The reason why I'm doing it from the back is because on the front, there's a layer of wax. And oddly enough, the water doesn't absorb through nearly as well on the side that's coated in a wax than on the back side where it's just the straight paper. Now, before I started doing any of this tearing and ripping and using of these collage papers, I did let them dry completely. And would it surprise you to know that if it's a thin layer of Power Wax, it dries a lot faster than a really thick layer of Power Wax? Yeah, probably not a big surprise to you. So exactly how long it will take Power Wax to dry for you depends on variables that I don't know. So is it a very humid place or is it a very dry place where you're creating? That'll have a big impact on how long things take to dry. For these papers here, I did them in the morning and I came back right after lunch and they were ready to go. So because these are made with Power Wax, do you have to use a special glue? Nope, I'm just using plain old gel medium here. You can use a glue stick, fluid matte medium, gel, whatever you like to use to glue down tissue paper, you can adhere it with here. I'm just putting a bit of it underneath and then putting some on top. Now the reason why I'm putting some of it on top is simply because I've got a finger that's got gel medium on it that is smoothing it down and making it sure that it's pressed nice and flat into the gel medium. So for all practicalities, I'm like, yeah, put some on the bottom, put some on the top. So again, another one of those very forgiving things. There's really no wrong way to do it. However you want to stick that tissue paper onto the surface you're playing with. Now because this is a wax, that means you can scrape away or scratch into the wax. So I'm using a scoring tool here and I am simply removing some of the wax, which means unlimited possibilities for ways that you can customize the collage papers to whatever you want them to be. Now, in order to do this with the Power Wax, one thing you do need to remember is that the Power Wax does need to be dry before you do this. Something else that I learned the hard way is that tissue paper is not as strong as, say, steel. So if I've got something really sharp and I'm scratching hard into the tissue paper, that tissue paper, well, it will rip. When I used a bamboo skewer, when I used a toothpick, those ripped for me very, very easily, which is why I started looking through my stash to find something else that I could use and landed on this embossing tool. I can't remember if the proper name for this is a scoring tool, an embossing tool, a stylus, I don't know. But I will find some for you and have them linked down below in the supplies. Now, because this is tissue paper, it means that you can see sometimes what's underneath it. So I love that some of that vintage script is peeking through that letter I. When you've made papers for collage, you can pull out small little areas of it and use it to build interesting elements onto your collages, whether it be in your art journal, an ATC, a card, whatever it is you like to do. But you can also use big sections of it too. Now, because this is tissue paper and what's underneath will peek through just a little bit, I want to glue this down just on the green. Now, I could have thought very carefully about how to tear this or cut it so it's exactly that, but instead I went for the easy way. I just put the gel medium on the green and then I'm going to tear the tissue paper. Because that gel medium, it has water in it. It's got moisture. So that's going to weaken the tissue paper and make it a whole lot easier to tear and rip where I want to. And here's where this piece of cardboard's at after I've added a few more layers, a little bit more color to this. What you've seen in this video is just the beginning of what you can do with Powerwax. Now, earlier when I first got my hands on Powerwax with the old formula, I created an art journal page and I made a video of this whole process explaining it to you. And I believe that everything that I did in that video with the old Powerwax, I can do with the new Powerwax. And in some ways, the new Powerwax is better. Because you see, down here, when I was doing this stenciling right here, it was just a little juicy because the old Powerwax was juicier, it was moister. And so things might run under the stencil just a little bit more easily than it will with the new formula. So I think that part would have been a whole lot easier. The other thing that I noticed that is different between the old and the new one takes a little bit longer to dry. So on here, when I've got some really, really thick areas, when I was scratching into it, like right here, that will take longer to dry than it did with the old formula. And then the other thing that I thought was kind of interesting is there was a little bit of a gloss to the original or the old version of Powerwax. And in this new one, it's very, very, very matte. I really, really like that. And then the other difference that I noticed between them is there is a slight smell to the new Powerwax, but again, once I put the lid on the jar, I don't notice it. And definitely once everything's dry, I haven't noticed a smell in anything. Thanks so much for being here. I so appreciate you joining the play. Now, if you found this video helpful, if you found it interesting, I have a favor to ask. Could you give it a thumbs up? And if you know of somebody that would be interested in this video, share this with them so they can join in the fun too. Now, if you'd like to know more about what I'm up to, you can hit that subscribe button, and that way you'll know as soon as I've got a new video out. And you can also find everything I'm up to over on my website at acolorfuljourney.com. Thanks so much for letting me be a part of your colorful journey.